Are you the cowboy who saves lost children?" A boy clung to his leg. The wind howled like a living thing, tearing through the barren ridges of the frozen valley. Snow fell in thick sheets, stinging the face like 1,000 tiny knives, and the world had shrunk to white, to cold, to silence broken only by the whimpering of 4 small figures stumbling through the drifts. Their clothes were ragged, soaked, clinging to pale skin stiffened by frost. Each step they took sank them deeper into the snow, every gasp of breath visible in the frigid air. Hunger had hollowed their bellies, exhaustion weighed their limbs, and fear had carved lines into faces too young to know despair. The first to falter was a boy of 8, his dark brown hair plastered to his forehead. His small hands clutched at nothing but air, and he fell forward, buried momentarily beneath the snow's cruel embrace. Behind him, a girl of 10 with tangles of auburn hair let out a panicked cry, dragging herself toward him. A younger boy of 6, his blonde curls dusted white, whimpered in confusion and slipped in the drifts, tears freezing on his cheeks. Last came the smallest, a girl no older than 5, her chestnut hair in a loose braid, shivering so violently that she could barely hold herself upright. The landscape was merciless. Jagged rocks jutted through the drifts like black teeth, and the shadows of distant pines stretched across the snow, tall and skeletal. The children stumbled blindly, calling each other in muffled, trembling voices, hope dimming with every step. From the ridge above, a solitary figure watched. A man, broad-shouldered and cloaked in a heavy coat streaked with ice, sat astride a dark bay horse that pawed at the snow. His face was weathered, lined with years of storms and sun, eyes sharp even through the veil of the blizzard. The cowboy did not move at first, letting the wind and the snow carry the children past him, gauging the danger, measuring the desperation etched into their forms. Then, when the youngest child tripped again and called out with a voice brittle with terror, he spoke softly, almost to himself. "By the Lord, no one survives long out there alone." The horse whinnied in response, sensing the urgency in its rider. With deliberate care, the cowboy guided the animal down the slope, boots crunching in the ice, eyes never leaving the children. He reached them in moments that felt like hours, snow swirling around his knees. The smallest boy, blond and trembling, was the first to see him. Desperation overtook fear. He threw himself at the cowboy's leg, clinging with weak, pleading hands. "Please, please, help us." The words were almost inaudible beneath the wind, but they cut through the cold like fire. The cowboy knelt slowly, his gloved hands gentle but firm as he scooped the child into his arms. The other children froze, uncertain, their fear mingled with a flicker of hope. The girl with auburn hair took a cautious step forward, then another until she was trembling at his side, grasping his coat as though it were a lifeline. The youngest girl clung to her brother, eyes wide and searching. The 4 of them were small, fragile, and nearly broken, but they were alive, and for the cowboy, that was enough. "Hold on," he said, voice low but steady. "You're safe now. I won't let the snow take you." One by one, he lifted them onto the horse, holding them close against his chest, the animal steady beneath the weight of their trembling bodies. The cold bit at his face and hands, but he ignored it. All that mattered was their warmth, their life, their trust. Even the wind seemed to still, as if the world itself recognized the small miracle unfolding in the storm. The ride to his cabin was silent except for the labored breathing of the children and the soft scrape of hooves on ice. They clung to him as though he were their anchor, and for some of them, perhaps he already was. When the cabin came into view, a small, sturdy log structure with smoke curling from the chimney, relief softened their tense bodies. Inside, the air was warm, scented faintly of wood smoke and herbs. The cowboy carried each child to a makeshift bed, covering them with thick blankets and murmuring soothing words. Then, in the flickering light of the hearth, he looked to the woman lying in the corner, a woman pale and fragile, fever burning her face, once the love of his life, now weakened by illness. She turned weakly at the sound of children's laughter, her eyes clouded but brightening with a spark of curiosity and something deeper. Hope. The children, sensing her weakness, instinctively tended to her. They brought her sips of warm broth, arranged pillows behind her back, and even tried to make her smile with small, awkward games of pretend. The cowboy watched silently, heart swelling with an unfamiliar warmth. The room that had been cold and lonely began to feel alive, filled with tiny hands and soft voices, laughter mingling with coughs, hope growing in the corners of despair. Outside, the blizzard raged on. Inside, a different storm had begun, a storm of life returning, of families forming, of love and trust blooming in the unlikeliest of places. The smallest boy, who had clung to the cowboy's leg in the snow, now sat cross-legged near the hearth, staring at him with eyes wide as if the man were both savior and mystery. Are you really going to keep us?" he asked softly, voice trembling. The cowboy met his gaze, firm and certain. "I'll keep you safe," he said. "All of you. From now on, this is your home." And for the first time in many months, the fevered woman smiled, reaching a trembling hand toward the children, who eagerly took it in theirs. A fragile bond had formed in the heart of a cruel, frozen world, 4 lost children, a barren woman, and a cowboy who refused to leave them to the snow. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, a family was born. The first morning after the blizzard, the cabin glowed softly in the pale light of dawn. Snow clung in heavy drifts around the log walls, but inside, warmth pooled from the hearth, filling every corner with the promise of life. The cowboys stirred from a restless sleep, boots already dusted with the previous night's snow, eyes scanning the small group huddled under blankets. The 4 children had slept fitfully, trembling occasionally as if the cold still lingered in their bones. Yet, when they awoke, there was a softness in their eyes, a fragile trust. The smallest girl, no older than 5, blinked sleep from her chestnut eyes and shyly touched the fevered woman's hand. "Are you better now?" she whispered, voice barely audible. The woman, still pale, but with the faintest hint of color returning to her cheeks, smiled weakly. "A little," she said. Her voice was hoarse, but it carried a warmth that made the children beam. She looked to the cowboy, gratitude mingling with something tender and unspoken. His hand brushed briefly against hers, rough yet careful, and he gave a small nod, a silent promise that he would protect this fragile, imperfect family. The cabin soon filled with motion. The auburn-haired girl carefully gathered scraps of bread and warmed them over the fire, handing them to the others. The dark-haired boy, the one who had clung to the cowboy's leg in the blizzard, helped the younger boy wrap a tattered coat around his shoulders. Even the smallest girl found courage to fetch a small jug of water, her fingers trembling but her resolve firm. In their actions there was gratitude, yes, but also a determination to repay the man who had saved them from the merciless snow. Outside, the world remained harsh, the snow unyielding. But the cowboy, ever patient, taught the children how to navigate the drifts safely, how to keep warm, how to tend the small patches of garden that had somehow survived the winter frost. Carrots, onions, and a few hardy greens peeked through the frozen earth, waiting for the tender hands of the children to coax them into life. "You'll see," he said one afternoon, kneeling beside the auburn-haired girl as she pressed seeds into the soil, "even in cold, life finds a way, just like you found your way here." His voice was steady, but there was a softness to it that made her glance up at him with wide, trusting eyes. The woman, still weak but improving daily, began to join them in the garden, her fingers brushing earth and seeds, her laughter tentative but growing. There was something magical in the way the children adored her, how they fussed over her blankets, her meals, even her coughs. And slowly, the warmth she gave back to them worked wonders, pulling her body from fever and exhaustion, reshaping her from fragile to strong. But the outside world was not as kind. On the rare occasions when the family ventured to the market, a small cluster of wooden stalls in the nearest town, they were met with sneers and whispers. "Look at that barren woman, playing mother to orphans," one man muttered under his breath. Children pointed and laughed, some cruelly tossing snow in their path. The cowboy's jaw tightened at the sight, but he did not respond with anger. Instead, he held the children close, his hand resting protectively on each shoulder, letting their small hearts feel safe even as the world sought to wound them. At night, by the hearth, the tension of the day melted into something softer. The auburn-haired girl curled against the woman's side, dark-haired boy leaning against the cowboy, eyes heavy with trust and relief. The smallest boy traced tentative fingers along the cowboy's sleeve, whispering, "Thank you for saving us." His voice was almost inaudible, but it carried a weight that made the man's chest tighten, a strange ache that was more than mere compassion. Evenings became moments of quiet romance, small gestures of tenderness between the cowboy and his wife. He would bring her a warm blanket, press a hand to her forehead, brush a stray lock of hair from her eyes. She, in turn, would offer a gentle smile, a whispered word of gratitude, a soft touch on his arm. The children watched in fascination, sometimes whispering questions, sometimes curling closer as if sensing the unspoken bond growing between the two adults. Yet the tension was never far. One icy evening, as the wind whipped snow against the cabin walls, the smallest boy, the one who had clung to the cowboy's leg in the storm, climbed onto the porch shivering. I can't sleep," he said, voice trembling. "The wind, it sounds like it's calling us back." The cowboy knelt, pulling the boy close. "Listen," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "The storm is loud, yes, but it can't touch us here. Not if we hold together. Not if we stay close." The child clung tighter, wrapping tiny arms around the man's waist, his forehead pressed against the rough fabric of the coat. The auburn-haired girl and the others joined, one by one, until the family huddled together on the porch, breathing warmth into the cold night, defying the storm. Over weeks, life settled into a rhythm. The cabin, once quiet and lonely, now echoed with laughter, with the chatter of small voices, with the promise of growth. The children learned to plant vegetables and fruits in 3 small gardens behind the cabin, coaxing life from the stubborn soil. They laughed when carrots bent oddly, when frost nipped at the greens, when seeds refused to sprout, yet they celebrated every tiny success with joy that was uncontainable. Romance blossomed quietly, naturally. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of gold and crimson over the snow-draped hills, the cowboy and his wife sat side by side, hands brushing as they patted soil and sorted seeds. Her head rested lightly against his shoulder, and he let his fingers intertwine with hers. "You've brought life back into this cabin," he murmured. "Not just to the children, to me." Her smile was soft, a flicker of warmth that rivaled the setting sun. "And you've brought them to me," she whispered. "I never thought I would feel hope again." The children, busy nearby, glanced up, sensing the tenderness but not yet fully understanding it. They only knew they were safe, loved, and part of a family that had chosen them, that had fought the storm for them, that had open hearts that once knew only longing and sickness. The town might mock them. The wind might still rage outside. Life might remain harsh. But here, in the cabin, warmth had returned. Trust had returned. And love, fragile, quiet, and persistent, was beginning to root itself, just like the seeds in the soil. Even the smallest boy, curled against the cowboy's side, whispered in the quiet evening, "I think we're finally home." And for the first time in a long while, the cowboy allowed himself to believe it too. Winter lingered stubbornly in the valley, snow still clinging to rooftops and fence posts, but the cabin pulsed with life. The children, once fragile and trembling, now moved with energy and curiosity, laughter echoing through the log walls like music. They had grown into the home, into the family, and into the hearts of the cowboy and his wife, who, by now, had regained her strength entirely. The fever that had once consumed her was gone, replaced with a flush of vitality that made her eyes shine and her smile bloom. The garden behind the cabin was lush, bursting with hardy greens, potatoes, and rows of carrots standing firm against the stubborn frost. The children, their cheeks pink from work, dug and planted, watered and laughed. Even the smallest boy, the one who had clung to the cowboy's leg in the blizzard, now ran between the rows of vegetables, calling to the others with a sense of pride and belonging. He paused often to glance back at the cowboy, a grin splitting his face. But life beyond the cabin remained cruel. The townspeople, steeped in suspicion and gossip, continued to sneer. When the cowboy led his makeshift family into the market one chilly morning, he saw the same looks. The cold laughter, the pointing fingers, the murmured words meant to wound. Orphans in their den of thieves, a man spat, voice low but meant to be heard. Another woman shook her head at the sight of the once ailing wife standing strong among the children. The cowboy's jaw tightened. He did not respond with anger. His eyes were steady, unwavering. But he let his presence be a shield. "Keep close," he said to the children, hand firm on each shoulder, guiding them past the sneers and mockery. The smallest girl buried her face against the wife's coat, trembling, but the woman's gentle hand rubbed her hair soothingly. "Let them talk," she whispered. "They cannot touch what we have here." Back at the cabin, the tension melted away. The warmth of the hearth, the smell of stew bubbling in the pot, and the laughter of the children erased the sting of outside cruelty. Even the auburn-haired girl, once timid and hesitant, now stood tall, holding a basket of freshly harvested carrots, proud of the life she was helping to grow. Romance had deepened into a quiet, unspoken love, punctuated by small gestures. One evening, as twilight bled into the horizon and the snow outside glimmered like diamonds, the cowboy helped his wife tend to the garden's last row of sprouts. Their hands brushed repeatedly over the dark soil, fingers intertwining without words, hearts communicating where lips had not yet dared. "You've saved more than these children," she murmured, voice low, eyes glistening. "You've saved me." The cowboy paused, kneeling beside her. "No," he said softly, voice rough but tender. "We saved each other." He let his forehead rest lightly against hers. Around them, the children's chatter faded into background. The wind outside softened. The moment held like a fragile crystal in the vast, harsh world. The bond between them, man, wife, and children, was unshakable. They shared chores, laughter, and gentle lessons. The auburn-haired girl taught the younger children to braid their hair. Dark-haired boy showed them how to chop wood safely. And the smallest boy continued to shadow the cowboy, clinging when he felt uncertain, just as he had in the blizzard. Each child had a place, a role, and a home that had been carved from the storm. The townspeople's hostility reached a peak one afternoon when a merchant sneered openly at the woman carrying a basket of produce. "Why waste your time on children that aren't yours? They'll never belong." His words were sharp, meant to provoke, but the cowboy stepped forward, hand resting on the hilt of his knife, not threatening, but steady, a pillar of unwavering authority. "They are ours," he said simply, "every one of them, and we will live as we please." His voice carried a weight that silenced the crowd, and though whispers followed them back to the cabin, no one dared challenge him again. At home, safety and love reigned. The children thrived in the garden, learning to cultivate not just food but joy. They built a swing from a sturdy branch, carved toys from leftover wood, and even began teaching the wife small games to test her recovered strength. Each evening ended with warmth, firelight dancing on the log walls, the smell of baked bread and stew filling the cabin, and the family huddled together, sometimes in laughter, sometimes in quiet contentment. One night, after the children had fallen asleep, the cowboy and his wife sat on the porch, hands entwined, gazing at the snow-covered valley. The smallest boy peeked through the cabin window, eyes wide, longing to join them, and the cowboy laughed softly. "Come on, little one," he called. The boy ran, clinging to his leg as he had in the blizzard, burying his face against the warm coat. The cowboy scooped him up gently, and together they watched the stars emerge, glittering against the cold night. "You see," the cowboy said softly, "even in the hardest storms we can find light. We found it here, together." His wife rested her head on his shoulder, eyes shining with tears of happiness. "We have," she whispered, "all of us." The children, stirred by the warmth and laughter, gathered around them. The auburn-haired girl hugged her mother, the dark-haired boy draped an arm over the cowboy's shoulders, and the others clung close, their small hands resting on the couple as if sealing the bond. Outside, the wind still whispered through the valley, but it could not reach them. Not now, not ever. The family had survived the storm, the cruelty of the world, and their own fears. Life had been harsh, but it had also been kind, forging a home out of ice, hunger, and uncertainty. And in that cabin, in the golden light of the hearth and the cold shimmer of the valley, love had grown, resilient, quiet, and unstoppable. The smallest boy looked up at the cowboy, eyes wide, voice barely above a whisper. "You really are father now, aren't you?" The cowboy smiled, pressing a kiss to his wife's hand, then holding all four children close. "Yes," he said, voice firm with certainty. "We're family, and no one can ever take that from us." Outside, the snow glistened like scattered diamonds. Inside, hearts burned bright and warm. The blizzard had passed, the storm of life had been met, and in the quiet, steadfast love of a cowboy, a wife, and four rescued children, a family had been born. They had found their home, their family, and their happiness, not in wealth, not in approval, but in each other, and that was enough.